6 Marines lying unconscious on the training floor. In the midst of them, a small black woman standing tall, her torn shirt revealing a wide-winged eagle tattoo on her back. A deadly silence envelops the air, with only ragged breaths audible. Just minutes ago, they mocked her as a weakling, but now, a heavy silence fills the training hall. Why did a tiny girl make these giants fall? The answer lies not only in her precise strikes, but also in a painful memory from the past, a promise that changed everything. Naomi Carter was just 24, hailing from the gritty streets of Chicago, where dreams often withered under the weight of poverty. Standing at a mere 5'2" and weighing barely 110 pounds, she looked more like a college freshman than a recruit ready for the unforgiving grind of Marine Corps training. As she stepped through the gates of Parris Island, the stares came fast and furious. Whispers slithered behind her back. How'd a little thing like her even pass the physical? The drill instructors zeroed in immediately. Sergeant Harris, a towering figure scarred from battles long past, sized her up with undisguised skepticism. He'd shaped Marines for 2 decades, and he knew fragile frames like hers rarely withstood the storm. In those first brutal weeks, Naomi grappled with the physical trials that seemed tailor-made for giants. The obstacle course loomed like an impossible fortress. Scaling wooden walls required desperate leaps and pulls, while others strode over with ease. Rope climbs were a nightmare. Her small hands slipped on the thick cords as bulkier recruits powered upward without breaking a sweat. Her fellow recruits noticed, and the mockery began. During rare breaks, she'd overhear the jabs. "She belongs in high school, not the Corps." Men and even some women chuckled, dubbing her Little Bird, a fragile creature unfit for the eagles of the Marines. The words cut deep, echoing the prejudices she'd faced all her life in Chicago's rough neighborhoods, where her size and skin color marked her as an easy target. But Naomi was no stranger to being underestimated. Growing up amid economic hardship, she'd learned resilience the hard way, working odd jobs to support her family after her father's health failed. What her platoon didn't know was that the eagle tattoo on her back wasn't just ink. It was a hidden promise from her father, a symbol etched in pain and purpose. She kept her martial arts background under wraps, honed since childhood in dingy dojos where technique trumped brute force. She'd earned her black belt in karate by 16, mastered judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, turning opponents' strength against them time and again. Yet here, in the Corps' emphasis on raw power and hierarchy, she lingered at the bottom, excelling in theory tests, memorizing protocols flawlessly, but dismissed as weak. The unspoken ranks favored the big and bold, who became de facto leaders. Naomi's perfect inspections and sharp mind earned no respect amid the sweat and shouts. Assistant Instructor Ramirez piled on the doubt, using her as the platoon's scapegoat. "Can't pull your weight, Carter? Then the whole unit pays." The mental toll mounted, each day a forge meant to break and remake. She watched recruits quit, wondering if the doubters were right. But deep down, Chicago streets had forged an unbreakable spirit. Late nights practicing under streetlights, extra miles run before dawn. As weeks wore on, her endurance sharpened, but the gap to the top dogs remained, and the little bird taunts persisted. What they didn't know was the tattoo on her back was a hidden promise left by her father. At Parris Island, the call to prove herself hit Naomi like a relentless tide. The ridicule that had simmered in whispers now boiled over into open scorn. Little Bird wasn't just a nickname anymore. It was a weapon, hurled by recruits who saw her as a liability in their quest for Marine glory. Men like McAllister, with his thinly veiled disdain for anyone who didn't fit the mold of a battle-hardened giant, sneered during formations. Carter, you think you can fly with eagles? Go back to the nest where you belong. The prejudice stung, laced with echoes of racial and gender biases she'd fought her whole life, turning every drill into a battlefield of words before fists. Worse still was the unfair treatment from drill instructor McAllister himself, a man whose bark carried the weight of authority. He piled on extra punishments, singling her out for the platoon's failures. Extra laps with a heavier pack during night marches, endless push-ups when she slowed the group. If Little Bird can't keep up, everyone suffers, he'd bellow, his voice like thunder cracking over the humid South Carolina air. It worked. The platoon turned against her, grumbling during chow, "She's dragging us down, why doesn't she quit?" Isolation wrapped around Naomi like a fog, each day chipping away at her resolve. The Corps' grueling regimen, endless runs, weapon drills, and team exercises felt designed to expose her weakness, and doubts crept in. Was she truly meant for this, or just another dream crushed under boot heels? Yet Naomi pushed on, her hidden skills a quiet armor. She aced the tactical quizzes, reciting Marine history with the precision of a veteran, but respect remained elusive. McAllister's tactics escalated, assigning her impossible tasks like carrying double gear on hikes, her small frame buckling under the load. One grueling night march left her collapsing in exhaustion. The platoon halted because of her. Furious murmurs rose, "Thanks to the bird, we're all paying." Naomi felt the weight of their stares, a chorus of judgment that mirrored the streets of Chicago where she'd been dismissed as too small, too different. The pressure built to a breaking point, testing not just her body, but the promise etched on her skin. That night, alone in the barracks, under the dim glow of a flashlight, Naomi clutched the discharge papers, her pen hovering like a sword of surrender. Tears blurred the lines as she imagined returning home defeated, the whispers of failure following her. They were right, she thought, the ache of isolation nearly overwhelming. But then, one memory stopped her. In the quiet aftermath of that fateful night, Naomi's inner turmoil raged like a storm she couldn't outrun. The discharge papers lay crumpled in our bunk, but the decision to stay brought no peace, only a deeper ache of doubt. She felt utterly useless, a broken piece in a machine built for unbreakable warriors. "What am I doing here?" she whispered to the shadows, her voice cracking under the weight of isolation. Every taunt, every extra punishment had chipped away at her spirit, leaving her questioning her worth. The Corps demanded strength she feared she lacked, and the prejudices, racial slurs veiled as jokes, gender doubts dismissed as reality, made her feel like an intruder in a world that didn't want her. Sleep evaded her as memories of Chicago flooded back, where survival meant hiding vulnerabilities, but here there was nowhere to hide. Then came the flashback, vivid as if it were yesterday. Her father, Elijah Carter, lay pale in a sterile Chicago hospital room, tubes snaking across his chest from wounds sustained in Vietnam that had never fully healed. The beeps of machines filled the air, a somber rhythm to his labored breaths. Naomi, just a teenager then, held his hand, her eyes wide with fear. "Dad, you have to fight," she'd pleaded. He managed a weak smile, his voice a raspy whisper. "Naomi, remember this. An eagle grows strongest flying against the wind. It doesn't run from the storm. It uses it to soar higher. You're my eagle, girl. Promise me you'll fly no matter how fierce the gale." With trembling hands, he'd traced the outline of the eagle tattoo he'd insisted she get, a symbol of their bond, inked in defiance of pain. That promise had pulled her back from the brink, reigniting the fire within. She tore up the papers for good, vowing to honor his words. But even as resolve hardened, help arrived in an unexpected form. Staff Sergeant Miller, a grizzled veteran with eyes that had seen too many battles, noticed something during a routine inspection. As Naomi adjusted her uniform, a glimpse of the eagle tattoo caught his eye, the same design from his old unit in Vietnam. "Carter?" he said quietly, pulling her aside after lights out. "That ink? It's from the 3rd Marines, Quezon, 68. Your father, Elijah?" Naomi nodded, surprise mingling with caution. Miller's face softened, a rare crack in his drill instructor armor. "He saved my life that day, pulling me from the rubble. Damn fine Marine. You've got his fire in you. Don't let these fools snuff it out." From then on, he became her quiet mentor, offering subtle guidance, tips on MCMAP techniques during off hours, words of encouragement whispered in passing. "Use their doubt as your wind, Eagle," he'd say, echoing her father's wisdom. He taught her to channel her skills strategically, turning perceived weaknesses into weapons. Under Miller's wing, Naomi began to rebuild, her performance sharpening in subtle ways, faster runs, cleaner executions. Yet the prejudices lingered, and McAllister's antagonism showed no signs of easing. Miller warned her, "This is just the beginning. Stay sharp." But even Miller couldn't foresee that Naomi would soon face a trial harsher than anything before. The harshest trial arrived under the fluorescent lights of Paris Island's vast gymnasium, where the Marine Corps Martial Arts Program, MCMAP, test unfolded like a rite of passage forged in sweat and steel. This wasn't just about belts or badges, it was the Corps' way of molding warriors, starting with the basics. The warrior stance for balance, break falls to absorb impact, and fundamental strikes blending punches, kicks, and grapples into a seamless arsenal. Recruits learned to wield their bodies as weapons across close-quarters ranges, from arm's length to ground fights, all under the watchful eyes of instructors who demanded precision over power. Naomi entered the mat area with quiet focus, her platoon buzzing around her. McAllister's taunts still echoing, the little bird label clinging like a shadow. Miller nodded from the sidelines, his subtle advice ringing in her ears. Remember the wind, use their force against them. For weeks leading up, Naomi had absorbed the MCMAP fundamentals, her hidden expertise allowing her to fly under the radar. She practiced discreetly, noting the styles of her peers. Lopez, the cocky boxer from New York with his lightning jabs and footwork honed in urban rings. Harris, the wrestler relying on takedowns, and others like the giant Williams all telegraphing their moves in drills. Paired with smaller recruits at first, she played along, gathering intel on weaknesses. Lopez's tendency to overcommit on crosses, for instance. The gymnasium reeked of rubber mats and determination, walls plastered with diagrams of pressure points and defensive postures. As Sergeant Johnson announced the evaluations, technique demos followed by live sparring, tension crackled. Naomi's heart pounded, but her father's words steadied her. Fly against the wind. The matches began predictably, bigger recruits dominating through sheer force, but Naomi's name was called early for the sparring phase. "Carter versus Lopez." The platoon chuckled. Lopez, at 180 pounds of coiled muscle, grinned like a predator, his boxing background making him a favorite. He bounced on his toes, shadow boxing with sharp jabs, boasting to the crowd, "This'll be quick, little bird's about to get clipped." They touched gloves, the referee's whistle piercing the air. Lopez surged forward, unleashing a rapid 1-2 combo, jab to probe, cross to crush. He expected an easy overwhelm, his reach turning the mat into his domain. But Naomi was ready. Her MCMAP training fused with years of judo and jiu-jitsu. She slipped the jab with economical footwork, ducking under the cross in a fluid warrior stance. As Lopez overextended, off balance for a split second, she countered smartly, driving an uppercut straight to his chin, snapping his head back, followed by a hook to the liver that folded him like a cheap suit. The impact echoed, Lopez crumbling to the mat in under 10 seconds, dazed and gasping. The gymnasium fell silent, the laughter dying in throats as recruits exchanged stunned glances. McAllister's smirk vanished. Even Johnson raised an eyebrow. Naomi stood tall, breathing steady, no gloating, just the quiet satisfaction of a promise kept. Miller's eyes gleamed with pride from the side. The laughter stopped. But this was only the beginning. The silence after Lopez's defeat hung heavy, but it was fleeting. The platoon's shock morphed into deeper conflict, whispers of doubt turning to outright resentment. "Lucky shot," McAllister muttered, his eyes narrowing with disdain, fueling an undercurrent of prejudice that rippled through the ranks. Naomi felt the shift, the air thickening with unspoken accusations. How could a little bird like her with her skin and size upend their world? Miller watched from afar, his quiet nod a reminder of his father's legacy, but even he sensed the storm brewing. As the evaluations pressed on, the mat became a stage for not just physical tests, but a battle against the biases that had haunted her journey.
Naomi's resolve hardened, echoing Elijah's whisper, "Fly stronger in the wind." Next up, Carter versus Harris. The wrestler from Texas, built like a freight train at 200 pounds, lumbered forward with a smirk, his grappling background making him a platoon powerhouse. "Time to ground the bird," he growled, the crowd leaning in, expecting a quick slam. Gloves touched, whistle blew. Harris exploded into a double-leg takedown, his massive arms wrapping around Naomi's waist like vices. She hit the mat hard, the impact jarring her bones, stars exploding in her vision as his weight crushed down. The audience held its breath. She was nearly slammed into defeat, teetering on the edge of blackout, pain shooting through her ribs like fire. For a heartbeat, Naomi lay there, feigning vulnerability, her body limp, eyes half closed, drawing Harris in deeper with overconfidence. As he shifted to pin her, smug victory in his eyes, Naomi sprang to life. Using MCMAP's ground defense, she sprawled her hips low, slipping from his grasp like water, then transitioned seamlessly into a rear naked choke, her arm snaking around his neck, forearm pressing the carotid artery, while her other hand locked the hold. Harris's face turned crimson, his powerful frame thrashing futilely against her precise leverage. The audience gasped, the gymnasium erupting in murmurs as he tapped out in 20 seconds, collapsing in bewilderment. 2 down. Naomi rose, wiping sweat, her eagle tattoo a silent talisman of triumph amid the growing awe and unease. The momentum carried into the third match, Carter versus McAllister. The racist recruit, his prejudice no longer veiled, stepped up with venomous mockery. "Think you can take me, you little—" he spat, slurs barely contained, the platoon tensing at his open disdain. Naomi met his glare calmly, but inside, the words ignited a fire. Echoes of Chicago's streets, where such hatred had tried to break her before. They circled, McAllister charging with wild swings, his bulk telegraphing aggression born of entitlement. Naomi feigned weakness again, dodging clumsily at first, letting him close in with a takedown attempt that grazed her, drawing boos and cheers alight.
As he mounted, overconfident and exposed, she wrapped her legs around his neck and arm in a flawless triangle choke, MCMAP's tan belt staple elevated by her jiu-jitsu mastery, squeezing with calculated pressure that cut off blood flow. McAllister's eyes bulged, his taunts choking into silence as he flailed, face purpling before tapping frantically. The mat shook with the crowd's reaction, gasps turning to stunned applause, prejudices cracking under the weight of undeniable skill. Naomi released, standing tall, her breath even, but the victory tasted bittersweet amid the lingering hostility. But the real opponent hadn't appeared yet, and Naomi had no idea the hardest blow would come from outside the mat. The gymnasium's air was thick with tension, the weight of Naomi's victories over Lopez, Harris, and McAllister shifting the platoon's mood from mockery to uneasy awe. But the whispers of resentment lingered, a silent accusation that her skill was somehow unfair, a betrayal of their expectations. Now, the real test loomed. "Carter versus Williams," the call echoed, and the giant stepped forward, a 6'6", 250-pound colossus, his shadow swallowing the mat. Williams, the platoon's most imposing recruit, had watched Naomi's fights with a quiet intensity, learning from others' mistakes. His strategy was simple: use his overwhelming size to crush her, no finesse needed. The crowd leaned in, certain this was the end of the little bird. Sergeant Johnson and Miller exchanged glances, the latter's nod a faint flicker of faith. As gloves touched, Williams loomed like a mountain, his eyes cold but cautious. The whistle blew, and he lunged with terrifying force, seizing Naomi in a bear hug and slamming her to the mat with a thud that shook the floor. Pain surged through her like wildfire, ribs screaming, breath stolen as the crowd gasped, convinced she was finished. Her vision blurred, the eagle tattoo on her back burning against her torn shirt as if her father's spirit roared in defiance. For a moment she lay still, the weight of Williams pinning her, his massive arms tightening to force a submission. The platoon murmured, some with pity, others with grim satisfaction. She's done now. In a slow-motion flash, Naomi's hand gripped the edge of her shirt, fingers brushing the eagle tattoo, its wings a pulse of strength beneath her skin. Her father's voice echoed, "Fly against the wind." Gritting her teeth, she refused to break. Drawing on MCMAP's ground-fighting principles, she shifted her hips, creating a sliver of space. Then, with a spark of cunning, she used psychological tactics to unnerve the giant. "You're scared, Williams," she whispered, her voice steady despite the pain. "All that size, and you know it's not enough." His grip faltered, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. She'd read him like an open book. Seizing the moment, Naomi exploded into action. She bridged her hips, rolling Williams off balance, and slipped into a side mount. Before he could recover, she drove an elbow strike into his solar plexus, the nerve cluster igniting a shock of pain that doubled him over. As he gasped, she grabbed his head, pulling it down while her knee rocketed upward, targeting the pressure point at the base of his skull, an MCMAP technique honed by her jiu-jitsu precision. The impact was spectacular, a crack like thunder as Williams' legs buckled and he collapsed to his knees, stunned and helpless. The crowd roared, disbelief and admiration colliding as Naomi stood, blood trickling from a cut on her cheek, but her stance unbroken. She'd flipped the giant, turning his strength into his downfall, her eagle soaring against the fiercest wind yet. The gymnasium pulsed with raw energy, Naomi's triumph over Williams igniting a mix of awe and lingering resentment among the platoon. Her victories had silenced the loudest taunts, but whispers of doubt persisted, some recruits still clinging to their prejudices. How could this small black woman keep defying the odds? The air grew heavier as Sergeant Johnson called the final match, Carter versus Jenkins. Jenkins, an all-around fighter with a wiry 190-pound frame, stepped onto the mat with a quiet confidence that unnerved even the most seasoned onlookers. A former college athlete skilled in boxing, wrestling, and basic MCMAP, he was the platoon's dark horse, his versatility making him a formidable foe. The crowd, now split between admiration and skepticism, braced for the clash, sensing this was Naomi's ultimate test. From the whistle, Jenkins attacked with relentless precision, blending sharp jabs with grappling attempts that kept Naomi on the defensive. He landed a brutal hook to her jaw, snapping her head back, followed by a takedown that slammed her to the mat. Pain erupted, her nose bleeding freely, the crimson droplets staining the mat like a grim reminder of her mortality. The crowd's mood shifted, anger at Jenkins' ferocity mixed with sorrow for Naomi, who seemed to crumble under his onslaught. Another strike grazed her temple, her vision swimming as she struggled to rise, each blow chipping away at her resolve. The platoon watched, some whispering, "She's done!" but others, moved by her earlier feats, clenched their fists in silent hope. Naomi's body screamed for surrender, her legs trembling, the weight of every prejudice and punishment threatening to break her. On the verge of quitting, she collapsed to one knee, gasping, the mat cold against her palms. The gymnasium blurred, and in that moment of despair, her father's last words cut through the haze. An eagle doesn't die on the ground, it flies until the end. The memory hit like lightning. Elijah, frail in his hospital bed, his eyes fierce with belief in her. "You're my eagle, Naomi. Fly."
The eagle tattoo on her back burned as if alive, urging her to rise. She staggered to her feet, blood dripping, her gaze locking onto Jenkins with a fire that made him hesitate.
Naomi surged back, her exhaustion masking a calculated ferocity. As Jenkins lunged for another takedown, she sidestepped with MCMAP honed footwork, driving a knee strike into his liver with surgical precision, folding him forward in agony. Seizing the moment, she transitioned into a guillotine choke, her arms locking around his neck, squeezing with relentless pressure as her legs braced against his torso. Jenkins' face reddened, his strength fading as he clawed at her arms, but Naomi held firm, her father's words fueling her grip. The crowd held its breath, then erupted as Jenkins collapsed, unconscious, the mat shaking under his fall. Naomi released him, standing shakily, blood and sweat mingling, her eagle tattoo gleaming under the torn fabric, a symbol of her unbreakable spirit. Naomi thought it was over, but her final trial was yet to come, from the system itself. The gymnasium was a cauldron of raw emotion, the echo of Jenkins's collapse still reverberating as Naomi stood, battered but unbowed, her blood-streaked face lit by quiet defiance. The crowd's roar softened into a murmur of awe, the little bird moniker fading into whispers of a new name. Eagle. Recruits who once scoffed now nodded in reluctant admiration, their eyes tracing the tattoo that had come to symbolize her strength. Sergeant Johnson stepped forward, his stern face breaking into a rare nod of approval. "Carter, you've shown what a true Marine can do," he declared, his voice carrying over the hushed platoon. "Technique, grit, heart, that's the Eagle way." The praise washed over Naomi, a fleeting warmth against the ache of her bruises, but it felt like a promise fulfilled, not just to herself, but to the father whose words had carried her through. Yet, as the applause faded, a shadow crept in. McAllister, still nursing his bruised pride, stood up, his voice cutting through the moment like a blade. "She's been hiding her skills, deceiving the unit," he accused, pointing at Naomi. "How's that fair? She played us all, acting weak to show off." Murmurs rippled through the platoon, some recruits nodding, their admiration tainted by suspicion. Had she manipulated them, pretending to be less to gain an edge? The accusation stung deeper than any blow, threatening to unravel the respect she'd fought so hard to earn. Naomi's heart sank, her gaze dropping to the mat, the weight of isolation creeping back. She'd faced fists and prejudice, but this, a challenge to her integrity, felt like a betrayal of her father's legacy.
Before the murmurs could grow, Staff Sergeant Miller stepped into the center, his weathered face commanding silence. "Enough," he barked, his voice a thunderclap. "You want the truth about Carter? That eagle on her back, it's the mark of the 3rd Marines, Caisson 68. Her father, Elijah Carter, carried that same ink. He dragged me out of hellfire when I was bleeding out in Vietnam, gave his own blood to keep me alive. Naomi's not hiding, she's honoring a promise to be the warrior her father raised." The gymnasium fell silent. McAllister's accusation deflated as recruits exchanged glances, shame creeping into their eyes. Miller turned to Naomi, his voice softening. "You're no deceiver, Eagle. You're proof that courage doesn't come from size or show, it comes from the soul." The platoon's mood shifted, suspicion melting into respect like dawn breaking through a storm. Lopez, the boxer, was the first to step forward, offering a quiet nod. "I was wrong about you, Carter." Harris followed, rubbing his neck where her choke had humbled him. "You're the real deal." Even McAllister, his face flushed, muttered a grudging apology. Naomi met their eyes, not with triumph, but with the quiet strength of someone who'd fought for her place. The eagle on her back felt lighter now, no longer a burden, but a badge of honor, tying her to a legacy that had reshaped the platoon's heart.
With the gymnasium battles behind her, Naomi stood at a crossroads, the weight of her newfound respect a quiet victory that echoed her father's legacy. The eagle nickname had taken root, whispered with reverence where Little Bird once stung. Yet Naomi didn't bask in the glow of triumph or lord her skills over the platoon. Instead, she turned her focus to those who needed it most. The weakest recruits, the ones who stumbled on obstacle courses or faltered under the weight of heavy packs, just as she once had. In the dim light of evening study sessions, she gathered them in the barracks, breaking down MCMAP techniques with patience, how to shift weight for a warrior stance, how to angle a strike for maximum impact. "It's not about strength," she'd say, her voice steady but warm. "It's about using what you've got." Her teaching was a lifeline, a reflection of the promise she'd made to her father to soar, not just for herself, but for others. The transformation rippled outward. Lopez, the once brash boxer, sought her out to refine his footwork, his ego softened by her skill. "You made me see I've got more to learn, Eagle," he admitted, a grin replacing his old bravado. Harris, the wrestler who had underestimated her, asked for tips on escaping chokes, his respect now a bond forged in defeat. Even McAllister, his prejudice humbled, lingered after drills to watch her teach, eventually joining the circle with a quiet, "Show me that triangle choke again." What began as grudging apologies bloomed into camaraderie, former mockers now calling her friend, their laughter no longer cruel, but shared over hard-won lessons on the mat. Naomi didn't demand their loyalty, she earned it. Her quiet strength knit the platoon together like a family forged in fire. Staff Sergeant Miller watched this unfold, his grizzled face softening with pride. "You're doing what your father did," he told her one evening, "building warriors, not just fighters." Naomi's influence reshaped the platoon's spirit, churning suspicion into unity, proving that true strength lifted others up. Her own performance soared. Runs became faster, obstacle courses less daunting, as if shedding the mask of Little Bird had freed her to fly. Word of her feats spread, whispered among other platoons at Parris Island, her name becoming synonymous with grit and heart. But Naomi never imagined her story would become a legend retold to generations of Marines. Graduation day at Parris Island dawned crisp and clear, the air humming with pride as Naomi stood in formation, her uniform crisp, the eagle tattoo hidden, but its strength radiating through her steady gaze. The platoon, once divided by doubt and prejudice, now stood united, their respect for her hard-earned and unshakable. As Sergeant Johnson called her name, the crowd, recruits, instructors, and families, watched in anticipation. "Recruit Carter," he announced, pinning the top Warrior medal to her chest. "You've proven what it means to be a Marine. Courage, skill, and heart that lifts others up." The applause was thunderous, but Naomi's eyes sought her mother in the stands, a quiet woman from Chicago, whose tear-streaked face mirrored her own pride. Her father's absence ached, yet she felt his presence in every clap, every nod. His eagle had soared. That evening, Naomi sat alone in the barracks, penning a letter to her mother under the soft glow of a lamp. "Mama, I have flown like the eagle just as Dad promised. I didn't need their applause, only to keep my word to him, to be the warrior he raised me to be. The wind was fierce, but it carried me higher." She sealed the envelope, her heart light with fulfillment, knowing she'd honored Elijah's legacy not just through her victories, but by forging a family among her platoon, teaching them to rise above their own storms. As the ceremony's echoes faded, Naomi's story spread beyond Parris Island, whispered in chow halls and training fields, a tale of a small woman who defied giants and prejudice with grit and grace. For older veterans watching, her journey was a mirror to their own battles, against enemies, doubt, or time itself. The narrator's voice closed softly. "Naomi Carter showed us fairness isn't given, but earned. Resilience isn't loud,
but unbreakable, and inner strength can change hearts forever. Veterans, what storms have you flown through? Share your story below, and let's honor the eagles among us.